Good Tuesday afternoon, and thanks for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Lauren Lemanchek. New today, alpine skiing legend Lindsey Vonn's Olympic dreams are still alive. She said this morning she will compete after a nasty crash last week during a World Cup race. Vonn says she ruptured her ACL in her left leg during that crash, but as long as she has a shot at winning, she's going to go for it.
So this is not obviously what I had hoped for. I've been working really hard to come into these games in a much different position. I know what my chances were before the crash, and I know my chances aren't the same as it stands today, but I know there's still a chance. And as long as there's a chance, I will try.
This afternoon, fallout from a stunning development at the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office. Another round of mass resignations, 8 this time, confirmed by KARE 11 late last night. That brings the total to 14 staffers who've resigned, with experts saying this is unprecedented in the history of Minnesota. Those in the first wave of resignations say it was in response to recent directives from the U.S. Department of Justice. For example, the feds declined to open a civil rights probe into the shooting death of Renee Good by a federal agent.
It is really a sad day because it's very bad for the rule of law in Minnesota. They have dedicated their lives to public service, and now they have been forced to leave because their consciences will not let them stay. That's a very sad thing.
Some of these veteran prosecutors were in the middle of massive fraud cases. Their resignation comes as the Minnesota Department of Human Services says it needs at least 150 more volunteers from state agencies to help address and fix fraud. The Department of Human Services plan includes reviewing provider documentation and owners' background studies. It also involves unannounced visits to more than 5,000 providers. All of this coming as no new fraud charges are being announced by federal prosecutors.
My most recent meeting with attorneys at the U.S. Attorney's Office was, I want to say, back in December at their office in downtown Minneapolis. We had a very productive conversation. Talks about future collaboration and information sharing. Unfortunately, I think all of the attorneys I met with in that meeting have since resigned from the office, and I haven't had any follow-up from folks at the U.S. Attorney's Office since then.
The federal government said it would be pulling funding for the programs that were being audited for fraud. That action has been paused as the state appeals that decision. Taking a live look now at our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., where this afternoon Congress has passed a bill to end a partial government shutdown. This legislation funds the government through the end of September, with the exception of the Department of Homeland Security. House Democrats say they want to see reforms to ICE before they'll take up long-term funding for DHS. President Trump says he will sign the bill. Meanwhile, today, House Democrats held a rally outside of Washington, D.C. headquarters of ICE, calling for the dismantling of the agency, the resignation of Kristi Noem, and the closure of the Dilley Family Detention Facility in Texas.
When something doesn't work, you take it apart. You make sure that you put it in the trash and you buy new parts. And so this is what we need to do. We need to dismantle it.
Meanwhile, changes are coming this afternoon for agents involved in Operation Metro Surge. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says all ICE and Border Patrol officers in the field in Minneapolis will now be given a body-worn camera immediately. She says the body camera program will expand nationwide since the funding is available. President Trump says he's okay with Noem's decision.
Well, it wasn't my decision. I leave it to her. They generally tend to be good for law enforcement because people can't lie about what's happening. So it's generally speaking, I think 80% good for law enforcement.
Also happening right now on Capitol Hill, the brothers of Renee Good, the woman shot and killed by an ICE agent last month, are set to testify in front of Congress. The hearing is focused on the, quote, violent tactics and disproportionate use of force by ICE agents. We're now in month 3 of Operation Metro Surge, and as immigration enforcement continues in our state, DFL lawmakers say they're planning to introduce legislation that would make it easier for people to sue the federal government over constitutional violations. Here's Danny Spiewak with the latest.
In 15 days, state lawmakers will return for the 2026 legislative session, with the federal immigration operations still fresh on their minds.
Minnesotans deserve to feel safe.
DFL House Floor Leader Jamie Long says his caucus will introduce legislation to give Minnesotans more authority to sue federal agents for alleged constitutional violations.
Fourth Amendment violations when someone's breaking into your house without an arrest warrant, or First Amendment violations when somebody is attacking a peaceful protester.
Under current federal law, citizens have the power to sue local or state governments for constitutional violations, such as when the families of George Floyd and Justine Ruszczyk-Damond settled multi-million-dollar lawsuits with Minneapolis over the conduct of MPD officers. But Congress has never expanded that law to include federal agents, and U.S. Supreme Court rulings over the years have largely shielded the federal government, according to University of Minnesota law professor Jill Hasday.
And the practical result of that is it's very difficult to sue federal officers for violating federal constitutional law.
A handful of states have already passed laws making it easier to sue federal agents. But in the case of Illinois recently, the Trump administration filed a legal challenge, writing in a brief that broadening authority to sue federal agents is a policy choice for Congress, not each individual state to make.
Do you believe if Minnesota passed a law like this that it would withstand a legal challenge?
Absolutely, and we're looking at what other states have done. Our law is going to be a little different from what we've seen in Illinois or Colorado or a couple of other proposals. We are just furthering that very basic constitutional rights that all Americans have.
With a tie in the Minnesota House, this bill would need bipartisan support to pass. So far, there hasn't been any official opposition, but House Republicans say they can't take an official stance until they see bill language introduced. Danny Spiewak, KARE 11 News.
The 2026 legislative session begins on Tuesday, February 17th, and lasts into May. Now a new voice impacted by Operation Metro Surge, a Hmong woman in Minnesota who says she came to Minnesota legally after fleeing religious persecution. Now she says she's in hiding. This time it's from ICE, who she says have detained her before. Heidi Wigdahl has her story.
Daily tasks like grocery shopping have come to a standstill for Thi Dua Vang and her husband, Apal Gian. A community member delivered these to help feed the family who is in hiding. On the morning of January 8th, their son opened the door to their St. Paul home, not knowing it was ICE. Agents detained Thi Dua, and by the next day she was taken to Texas, first El Paso, then later Houston. At one point, she believed she was in the process of deporting back to Vietnam before she was taken off the plane. Thi Dua and her family fled Vietnam after spending decades persecuted for being Christian. Family members have even been imprisoned for their faith. After more hardships as refugees in Thailand, the family found asylum in the U.S. 2 years ago with all the papers to prove it. But never did the family expect this to happen in the U.S.
After nearly
2 weeks detained, a judge ordered Thi Dua be released on bond. As family drove to her, she spent nearly 3 hours waiting outside at night in a city she didn't know. Thi Dua says from being detained to now in hiding, it's her family keeping her hope alive.
5 days after returning, Thi Dua had to do a check-in with ICE, but then was free to go. She says she's required to check in once per year. But since that check-in, ICE has come back to their home 3 times, trying to make contact. New today, the man accused of kidnapping and assaulting a 7-year-old girl from Zimmerman is appearing in court. Joseph Braggs now faces kidnapping and criminal sexual conduct charges. Investigators say he took the 7-year-old girl to a hotel room more than 130 miles from her home. Court records show Bragg did not know the girl or her family, but her mother told investigators she had what she describes as an unusual online interaction with him back in December. Since then, several parents have reached out to KARE 11 saying Bragg tried to offer babysitting or nanny services in local Facebook groups. Now county officials have issued a new request seeking any parents who employed Bragg for child care or anyone he reached out to. If Bragg contacted you in any way, investigators want to hear from you. Call the BCA hotline on your screen, 651-793-2465. Stick with us. There's more news and weather after the break.